Good morning, everybody. My name is McGregor Stevenson. I'm the publisher for the Domestic Preparedness Journal on behalf of the Texas Division of Emergency Management. The Domestic Preparedness Journal is a journal by practitioners for practitioners that has been in publication since 1998. TDIM was given the opportunity to take on the responsibility of continuing its operation starting in October, and we are moving forward in that process and would invite all of you to subscribe to the journal. It comes out weekly. We send out and starting soon, 2 articles a week that give information for all of the first responders, emergency management services, public health, national security, and provides those articles in the weekly update as well as in our monthly journal issue. And so on behalf of TDIM, we'd like to welcome you to this event. This is one of our first panel discussions that we're having, and obviously we've got a good rogues cast of characters to discuss what preparedness and response professionals need in the new normal. And with that, I will turn it over to Jim Featherstone, our moderator, who is the principal at Themata Strategic Consulting and deals with crisis management. And at this time, Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, McGregor, and thank you to TDIM for inviting me to be a part of this. I feel like a sparrow amongst eagles. I'm looking at the fellow panelists up here. Also, it's good to be back in Texas. Several of you in the audience I've worked with over the years, I guess going back to '04 when I did some work at College Station. So it's good to be back in Texas, and thank you all for taking time to participate this morning. I'm going to let each one of the panelists introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to get right into what I presume is going to be a pretty robust discussion. When I asked Chief Kidd why he would like for me to be a part of this panel, he says, well, you're never a prophet in your own land, so we're going to bring an outsider in to kind of moderate the discussion, because the people up here on my left and right are not at a loss for words or perspective, opinions, or experience. So with that, Chief or Country?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Warren Weidler. My nickname is Country. I am currently the Deputy Chief for Preparedness and Response here for TDIM. Prior to that, I served at the ESF-9 Search and Rescue Coordinator for TEEX for about 7 years, and then prior to that, I had a 30-plus year career with the Austin Fire Department in Special Operations. Thanks.
Good morning, my name is Rhonda Lawson. I'm a major with the Texas Department of Public Safety. I also serve as the DPS TDIM liaison. And prior to, I was with TDIM for about 7 years, but when it became its own agency under A&M system, I went back to Texas Highway Patrol. I was previously a DDC chair in Corpus Christi for 8 years. That's all I have, Rob.
I'm Colonel Rob Eason. I'm the Director of Operations, Plans, and Training for the Texas Military Department. Been in the Army National Guard for 30 years as of a couple days ago, and been in and out of what we call civil support operations, probably for about the last 20.
I'm Casey Stoughton. I'm the Director of Public Health in Amarillo, Texas. I've been with the department for right at 19 years, working in, I think, every job that there was at the health department, so epidemiology, tuberculosis, immunizations. And I guess if you hang around long enough, they let you be the director, so here I am. So I'm glad to be here this morning.
Good morning. My name is Susanna Jones, and I am the other Deputy Chief at the Texas Division of Emergency Management, and I have responsibility for recovery and mitigation, although Country and I together have a lot of other duties as assigned. Prior to this, I worked for the National Emergency Response and now Recovery Training Center at TEEX under the A&M University system. And prior to that, I spent about a decade overseas working foreign service for the Department of State.
Good morning. My name is Dominique Artis. I'm the Fire Chief for the City of Dallas Fire Rescue. I've been with the department about 27 years. I promoted up throughout the ranks, and I've been the chief of the department for a little over 3.5 years.
And as McGregor said, I'm Jim Featherstone. I did 22 years with Los Angeles Fire Department, did 8 years as the city's emergency manager, went to the private sector, and now, as my wife says, I'm a failed retiree. So, that being said, today's topic is kind of about looking forward, and what are the leadership styles, management styles, types that the new normal is going to require, because if we apply the leadership types and styles that we've applied in the past, then we're probably going to revisit the not-so-nice things or the failures of the past. So I'm just going to, it's kind of a broad opening point or topic that can have each one of the panelists speak on, and we'll just move the conversation along. And I'm not going to go in order because I don't want them to anticipate the next answer or question. You know, it's not a gotcha, but it's kind of more of an impromptu discussion. So I'm going to ask the young lady to my left to talk about, what do you see as the requirements or the needs of leadership and managers in the new normal? Looking back, let's not go way back. Let's go back to, let's say, 2017 forward. So that's been a pretty tumultuous time.
Yes, definitely. Hurricane Harvey. My life is divided into pre-Harvey and post-Harvey. Might move to COVID, I'm not sure. And I don't want to take up all the time, but I think there's a lot of important things going on that all of us in the room, and certainly everybody sitting up here, has recognized. And I kind of want to make a couple of points, and I'll pass it on. And that is, preparedness is huge, and we all know that, and that's extremely important. But we also have to acknowledge, even though we want to be completely prepared and proactive, there's always a part of what we do that is reactive, because everybody knows every event we're visiting there's something new we haven't faced before. So you have to accept that. I also think, and I'll just leave it with this, that it is time that we train and prepare especially in the field of emergency management and all those different fields that are involved in that we really look at the training and preparedness that we're giving our leaders. If any of you have heard Chief Kidd talk recently about the Basic Academy and providing a path to good management and leadership across the board and preparing those leaders to deal with things like that early on, I think that's key.
You see, we've got police, fire, and law up here. I'm sorry, police, law, police, fire, and military. So we got the apex predators. So, Colonel, from your perspective.
Well, you know, leadership's inherent in everything we do, and, you know, it's hard. Leadership isn't an easy business. And with the way we collectively, you know, have to work our disasters, every organization brings their own leadership styles. That the key, I think, that you know, I had in the notes was framework. And my framework with the Army is different than Major Lawson's framework from DPS, and it's different from fire departments. The things that really bring us all back together is the NRF, National Response Framework, to allow us to better work together. So really, I think it's going to come down to what we can take out of that and better understand what everybody brings to the table and how we can put those pieces together to make sure it all works.
Casey, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, public health has come to the fore in terms of being operational or leading operational efforts. So what do you see in your discipline, you know, your piece of the pie? How do you see the leadership and the management styles or the needs for them or them evolving as we look forward?
So I'm probably a little bit different than some of the other panelists in just that don't have all of the frameworks such as the military or some of the other pieces. So I think change is important. I think it should be natural. I also think it should be intentional. I think flexibility is something that we've had to learn over the last couple of years. And so I think that is probably good for us to learn to be flexible and to learn to be compassionate and do things just differently than what we've always done. So I think that there's a lot of words there, but I think that change is coming, and so it will be good.
That's interesting, because I had some folks on one of the teams I worked with years ago says, Jim, we shouldn't be flexible. A door is flexible, it swings. Says we should be fluid. you know, because fluid means that you can adjust on whatever plane you're on. So, but taking off of that, my fire brother here.
Yes, sir.
Chief, going forward, what do you see as the new or evolving or the needed leadership and management styles?
What we've seen is an expansion of the framework. And what I mean is being able to do more with less and being flexible and fluid enough to understand that some of the things that we're doing are new. Using our previous tenets that we've learned from other incidents that allow us to build the framework that we have, but being able to expand it to fit the different crisis or whatever event we're doing to make sure that we cover our safety aspects as well as meet with our partners and have great relationships with them. So we know the capabilities of our region or our personnel, and being able to have a staff that's committed to understanding how do we expand these different events that we're responding to and utilizing our partners. One of the biggest things for us in the city of Dallas is that we try to bring in our partners. So as we have different events or we're asked to do different things, such as when we started to have to give vaccination to our residents. Well, we're a large department, which we could probably handle it on our own, but we asked our partner departments to come in, and we created a team that we had all over the region to where everybody came in and they were sending different resources. So we didn't tax ourselves, but we learned a lot about each other. And so the next big crisis that would happen, we know the capabilities, we know the relationships, we know the different equipment each other has. And I think it's really aided our region, and it's also building the region up to be able to respond to different type of incidents.
Major? So you know, you guys are the alphas. There's no doubt about it. Big hats, big roles, big presence. So, but going forward, I would assume that, you know, the big Texas law has to look at how it will lead and manage the new normal.
That is so true. You know, we live in a time of exponential changes where a leader has to be able to be flexible. And I know we've heard that word several times. And I remember Casey said it in her introduction the other day, and so did Chief Rocher with Corpus Christi PD. So flexibility is the word. You have to be flexible and have the ability to be able to adapt enough to all the different things that are going on. And one thing as a leader is that you have to be able to manage and prioritize things. And I say this because who would have ever thought that the Texas Department of Public Safety would be involved in civil distress, would be doing screenings on the roadways, you know, to implement Governor Abbott's directives, also be screening at the airport. There were a plethora of things that we had never done before. So this was our new normal. So moving forward, we will continue to do things like that. And, you know, law enforcement, sometimes it's just kind of black and white, but you can't have that demeanor. You have to realize that there are shades of grays, and things that we have done previously, we no longer do that. Our role has expanded immensely. So that is the change that I have seen in law enforcement.
Chief Weidler.
Hey, so from that leadership perspective, two things. Probably bad at it, but I'll start with me. Some egoless leadership, right? It's tough to be the get it done, the 1-5 person, but what COVID has taught us is we're not even sure who our new partners are, right? We have gone and traditionally, I go to Texas A&M AgriLife. The agricultural extension person was helping us tremendously. Had I reached out to them 3 or 4 years ago? No. And then you get into public health, and those people, and I say those people because I didn't know a lot about them, and we're still trying to find our roles. And then from Hurricane Harvey, all the different missions from the different outside organizations, both working with the federal in the state all the way down. So it's kind of interesting when you say about our leadership and partners, and we're still trying to find our partners. Yeah.
It's interesting, Chief. I almost think that you looked at my notes ahead of time, because my next question, so there's an old adage that says culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I'm going to, so all the questions up here are not going to be softballs. I'm going to ask each one of you in your respective organization or your discipline, what do you think will be the biggest hinder to changing and moving leadership and management styles forward? Chief?
Oh, thank you. I think doing the same thing and expecting the results to always be the same. One thing that these last, a couple of things that this last couple of years have really taught me and my organization is that not because we can do or we are one of the larger departments in the state, that we have the capabilities of all the necessary things we need to do. And so we've got to always have a thrust to try to get better and learn, and always continue to engage not only our members inside of the department, but working with TDM and our emergency managers around the region to practice different scenarios. When Chief Cody's in the office, when he was there, we did a active shooter event with our police officers, and while we were doing that, we kindled a friendship with them that I think to this day has really allowed us to work really well in the city together. And being able to do that taught me a lot more about how our culture is in the department, and how it feeds off of making sure that we're doing things that not only feeds into keeping our members safe, but also builds upon the tenets that we've learned so we can continue to get better each and every day.
Casey, big hinder.
So I think infrastructure, probably on the public health side, infrastructure, we've really seen a lot of funding come through and been able to grow departments and surge capacity. And so I think that to be able to truly be prepared and to be in that leadership role, I think the infrastructure, I think it's really critical that we maintain that infrastructure.
Chief?
I think for us at the state level at TDM, we, as emergency managers, we talk about the different phases of emergency management. And I think the thing that we are trying to constantly be aware of, and the thing that can kind of catch us out sometimes, is the integration and avoiding the silos between those different phases, whether it's preparedness and recovery, response and recovery, mitigation and preparedness. We are working really hard to make sure that all of those are integrated to a point is that they're all working together at all times, instead of that normal timeline that we go through with emergency management. And those are the difficulties I think we face, is keeping up pace and keeping everyone working together.
Colonel, from the camouflage side, what's going to be the choke point in evolving forward?
And it may not just be from the camouflage side. When I think about the domestic operations, emergency management across the board, there are very few full-time practitioners that is their job is emergency management. Most of our responders, our people, all have some other full-time job, and then come in to do the disaster when the disaster happens. So, it's how do we better prepare, do the right kinds of things to make sure that each of our organization is ready with the culture, with the traditions that we bring to the table to work together to respond. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, it does, and we had done some work with one of the Marine Air Wings in California, and one of the things we did our planning P, and then we crosswalked it with the military planning process. Sometimes it's what could be a possible hinder is a simple thing, just changing the language.
They're very similar.
So that we're all speaking the same language. And a hinder doesn't mean a stop. It just means that you may have to put a little more effort or focus on it a little more. In fact, all of us have made a pretty decent living off of overcoming hinders in various, sectors and capabilities. So with the new normal, and, I think that we're all in agreement that there needs to be a different or an adjustment in terms of our leadership and our managing capabilities. One of the things that, I would say is that if you want your folks to jump higher, you have to teach them to jump higher. So what are you doing in your respective agencies or statewide to teach people to jump higher? Or is that a challenge? Wow, loud, roaring silence.
Well, wait on you to call.
Chief White.
The challenge is going to begin to get the people in, right? I'm a big believer in trying to get them in and get them into some culture, but not so much that I overcome them with me. And that younger generation, I get to say that now. I've kind of earned that, each set of grade comes from a set of kids. But I need to try to understand them, to get them in, because how I would teach them how I was taught is not how they're going to learn, right? They just don't learn that way. And so that's a struggle for me. Everything's electronic. I may have a bunch of phones. I have a bunch of phones because I can't figure out how to make them do one, right? I mean, that's honest. And so I'm that cultural gap from old school to new school.
I wrote everything down on paper.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in crayon and paper. So back to the combination of the hindrance of we need to try to attract the younger generation because they're going to. Everybody here is replaceable. We're going to get replaced. That's the nature of the beast. But how do you pass on that sense of relationships, that sense of work ethic? I find my daughter's up front. I'll introduce her right here. She's doing this. But I told her, everything says that we're going to have people change careers. That's the normal. Not jobs, careers about 7 times this generation, right? So we're going to have to go look at people in different career fields and try to attract them to come to emergency management. And I don't think we're ready for that. I mean, recruiting, we go to recruiting fairs to try to recruit people, but we need to go to every fair because you don't know who that person is ready for a change who's going to come to your organization and see it from a different light and help us.
Casey?
So I think that, again, it comes down to partnerships. I think professional organizations are so important. In Amarillo, we can be a little bit isolated, and so it's really important that we maintain those relationships with others doing the same work, as well as professionals doing different work. And so I think that being really intentional about taking the time to include our staff in those processes and in those organizations and the training opportunities that come that way is really important.
It's interesting because every new person I hired from 2009 forward, all new hires got a blank moleskin journal, because I believe you got to write things down, and they got a copy of Ender's Game, because I believe in reading, but to what Chief Widler and also what the Colonel's saying, there's a really interesting TED Talks, General McChrystal, and he talks about the inversion of leadership. Because he talks about he was commanding troops that weren't even born when 9/11 happened. And his generation and my generation, and probably several of the folks here on the panel, we came into the workforce when the more senior people had the knowledge and the respect, and they led. But now, because of the digital age, a lot of the leadership, not the responsibility so much, but the leadership shaping may come from the bottom of your seniority chart. So that's interesting that the inversion of leadership is real important to look at when you start to talk about who will the leaders and managers of the new normal be, because it won't always be the whiskered person. And when the chief said every gray hair was from kids, I didn't know if he meant kids literally or chief kid, because my gray hair is a part from chief kid.
Yeah, yes.
I'll say, actually, that's really interesting because, you know, we do know that most of our emergency management professionals come from something else. You know, whether that's, you know, predominantly fire, police, maybe some former military, but we now have education pipelines for emergency management. We have degree programs, we have professional organizations, we've got organizations that certify people in emergency management. But how many people are we bringing into that career field at 20? You know, are we doing much of that? I don't see it, of course, from the, you know, from the military side. You know, we've got our own little pipeline, but you know, are our emergency management offices, you know, out at various municipalities, state organizations, are they bringing people in that don't have that other, you know, experience to rely on?
Major.
You know, the adage of, we've always done it this way, so I see smiles because you guys know, we've always done it this way, so we're gonna continue to do it this way. That was the initial perspective at first. But because of TDM and DPS being together for so long, there was an integration there. And integrating law enforcement and emergency management. And slowly but surely, folks began to get it. The light bulb came on. And the aha moment for our agency was Hurricane Harvey. Normally, our troopers, they're out there doing their daily thing, running up and down the road. But our investigation division, our intelligence division, Texas Rangers, all of our commissioned folks, Harvey was a hands-on deck. So we had folks in the field that were not familiar with emergency management, but it was all hands on deck. So what do? We do what we do to make sure that the mission is accomplished. And I will tell you, after Hurricane Harvey, our leadership felt the need to ensure that we set our personnel up for success. And so subsequently, TDM was involved, and they provided some instruction for all of our personnel that were not in uniform. And they had an opportunity to be exposed to emergency management. So it opened up that avenue for them. Our leadership thought it was important, and then our personnel valued that the leadership thought for them to set our personnel up for success. So I do see a paradigm shift where law enforcement is being integrated now with emergency management. And I happen to sit on a committee, the All Hazard Incident Management Team Law Enforcement Committee. And that is one of the big initiatives that's being done, and I believe that ICP is going to take on this initiative as well, because we all work together. You know, those of us in law enforcement, we've done emergency management, we just didn't call it that. So there has been a big paradigm shift for us to get away from that old adage, we've always done it this way. So I'm excited about where we are going, not just DPS, but other law enforcement agencies who know the benefit and the value of what emergency management brings to the table.
So there's Joe Bruno, who was the emergency manager for the city of New York for years, said, he says, I don't have operational authority or control over any other department in New York, but I have the power to convene. And I think a lot of emergency managers, because and it used to piss me off, because when I first got into the emergency management business, it was always these hand wringings. You know, I said, we should have a T-shirt that says emergency manager and has a pair of hands ringing. You know, coming from fire, I was used to being, you know, an apex predator. I was used to being very actionable. But I realized that as an emergency manager, Joe was right. I didn't have operational authority or control over, Big Blue or Big Red or Big Yellow, Public Works. But I had the power to convene and to be able to get the various disciplines at the table. We would end we had a monthly public safety brown bag lunch. I supplied the chips and the drinks, you brought whatever sandwich you wanted. And we would end each meeting with who's not at the table this month. And so, to be able to spread it around because, and we started calling it crisis management because it wasn't just for emergencies, because we believed in sets and reps. So anything that we needed to do collectively as a city family or as a state family, we knew we had to get all these different pieces together to say, where's the red slice? There's things that we know, things that we don't know. There's things that we don't know that we don't know. And that red slice, that's what kills you. And if I think the collective can work to reduce that red slice, and one of the ways of reducing the red slice is bringing those asymmetrical perspectives and disciplines to the table. I mean, 15 years ago, public health was an afterthought. We kind of let emergency medicine sit at the table because we needed them to keep us going. But who would have thought public health would be a major player at the crisis table? So I just was going off on a little thing there about, getting all the people to the table, and emergency managers stop wringing their hands about what we can't do because we do have the power to convene. The person that creates the agenda is the one that runs the meeting, not the primary speakers. So, Chief?
Yeah, I think listening to you say that, I mean, Texas is a huge state. We have a huge amount of state agencies and organizations and local jurisdictions, and I absolutely think you're right. I think the challenge or the great thing about emergency management is you do have the power to convene, which means the onus is on you really to make sure that you're bringing in all of those folks. So, with every event we run through, I could probably say this in the past 10 years, I've thought, wow, I've never thought of including, I'm going to make this up, but TDLR, Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, but all of a sudden they have this huge piece, and they've been operating out there, and we didn't really know they were doing that. So I think the onus is on us to keep up that information and ensure that as we're moving forward in blue skies or not, that we're looking at all those pieces that can play a part to make things better for people who have a disaster.
We did some early work on supply chain resilience in 2015, long before it became a headline issue. And we brought in the Department of Libraries. They're researchers. They don't care what the topic is because we were doing a deep dive and looking at the food, water, big pharma, medical goods and supplies and transportation modalities. But we didn't know how to do, we did research because everybody, was somewhat educated, including the firefighters. Some of us can read and write. But we brought in the Department of Libraries. They were happy to be included. Now, they were under the tent with everyone else. They had never been asked before, but they were an asymmetrical partner that brought a tremendous, very specific muscle to that particular effort. So, one of the things in the crisis management world is, stop looking just dead straight ahead. Or I always say, you can't drive the car looking right over the hood ornament. You'll see the pothole and you can veer away from it, but if you drive the car looking down the block, who else out there can help the effort? Who else can we bring to the fight? And it may not be what we traditionally think that the fighters should be, but everybody can have a role in the crisis management world. Chief?
And for us, one of the challenges that we found in our organization is we have 5 different generations that are in our fire stations. And they all communicate differently. And so how do we get them all on the same page? Just like Country was saying, some of our newest and our youngest members, they understand and learn a lot different than our older members. And so we've made a concerted effort to make sure that as we train, we allow them to develop these trainings and make sure that they feel a part of the trainings to help us to get this collaboration in our groups. Another thing is recruiting. We're seeing a change in how we recruit our members now. And so it's important for us to go to those just different places looking for members because of some of the things you said. And we realize now the old things that we used to do just doesn't work well. And so we're doing that and having a little success, and so we will continue to do that. And one of the things I was going to tell you about, what you said, is what we did on one of our deployments with our Texas Task Force 2 is we went to a town that was devastated. I forget which town it was a couple of years ago, and one of the things we learned from Walmart, we brought in some of their logistic folks, and they said they could get this store back up and running within 24 hours because they do that so often at Walmarts whenever these disasters happen. And so we brought them in to help us to get this town at least one store up and running where the folks could come in and have food, water, and all that. And so that was a collaboration we began to have with them to understand how they're specialized in making sure that they have resources and get them in quick to locations that we're not sometimes familiar with.
The vaccinations and testing pods in Los Angeles County were run by the fire department's Type 1 logistics teams. I mean, they run big fire, so why not run big vax? Yeah, so I mean, the causal agent or the bad thing may change, but the processes a lot of times are pretty routine. Colonel, I want to come back to you as a question. This is, I had written it in my margin notes here. With the new normal as we move forward, so the military, everyone always understands that there's a warfighting mission, but humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and defense support of civil authorities, how do you see that changing as we move forward, or do you see it changing?
Well, things have changed a lot in the last 20 years.
Okay.
You know, I think the thing that really at least changed for the Guard, huge difference between pre-Katrina, post-Katrina, and then with the Texas Guard in particular, you know, the things that we did post-Katrina to support the state, to support our partners, and that's probably about the 15th time we've talked partnership, you know, across this panel, which tells me how important that is. You know, we made leaps and bounds between Katrina and Harvey, you know, which enabled us, I think, across the board. You know, Texas Guard looked like absolute gold up here, and the state of Texas looked like absolute gold, you know, up at the top, and down at the bottom, there's thousands of people being helped, and, you know, went fantastically, but there's a whole lot of sausage in the middle that leads to further change. And, you know, one of the biggest challenges that we have is unless and until the governor calls for us, you know, our funding is federal funding, and it's federal funding to train and prepare for our wartime mission. And we do get a little slice of state funding, but which we use to prepare for state support missions. But we've got to balance that with our part-time force. You know, with the Guard, everybody has very few full-time personnel, and everybody else, it's, 1 week in the month, 2 weeks a year. At least that's what they sold us when we signed up. So it's balancing, people's time. How much can I pull people for additional training versus their required wartime training versus their family and their careers. It is a challenge.
Definitely, and I'll tell you from the outside, looking at Texas, I think the military effort here is probably one of the best I've seen in my 3 decades in this business, so kudos to.
A whole lot of sausage in the middle.
And if I may, for that sausage, so a lot of people know or don't know that we have a helicopter rescue program in this state where the National Guard provides the aircraft and the crews, but the state via agreement with local government, all of y'all out there, we borrow your employees and we put them as a rescuer on the military aircraft. Pre-Katrina, no way. Post-Katrina and into Harvey, it paid off tremendously. But the sausage was, well, you can't do that. Well, why not? Well, you know, it's a military aircraft, and you got to have military people on aircraft. You can't have civilians. It's not even full-time civilians. We're borrowing them from somebody else. You know, so we've made tremendous strides strictly because we said, well, why not?
And now we've invited agencies and states and people from all over the country to come in for that training and those exercises, which pays off in dividends.
It pays
with
off huge.
Harvey.
It paid huge dividends in Harvey. We were running probably up to 300 aircraft at the time, but we knew what was going on. But you have to remember that the state, and Chief Jones will tell you that, we don't have employees. We have employees at emergency management, but we don't have responders. National Guard does. Any other responders in the state, we got to borrow from local governments, right? So it's kind of interesting to tag on that sausage making is ongoing. I promise you. But to the end customer, we're just trying to provide you the service.
So that swan just cruises across the pond, but down below the feet and the swan poop.
Yeah. Every now and then it doesn't taste good, but okay.
So,
Thanks.
Chief, you mentioned something, Chief Jones, you mentioned something earlier about some basic training. Because I think we're still, unfortunately, emergency managers are still defining who and what they do, but I think an effort, TDM's promoting an effort, or actually executing an effort to come in with some basic training. You want to talk about that real quickly?
Sure, and I'm going to try and channel my boss briefly, but I think all of us that have been involved in this fully support it, and I think the people in the room and at the table can understand that as a firefighter, you've got basic training when you start out. As a law enforcement officer, you've got basic training as you start out. In the military, you've got to go through basic training. I know public health is a little bit different other than at the federal level, but we're putting emergency managers out there that do have to make life and death decisions every day in our jurisdictions. They do have to handle, I mean, in this state, billions of dollars in federal funding, state funding, but we're not providing a basic training for those folks. Now, I'm the first one to say that there are many different paths in emergency management, but we've all been talking about how important it is for that younger generation. So I think Chief Kidd's vision and what TDM and our partners, along with our locals, will try to do is to build a program through that basic academy to provide that training and recruit the younger people and bring them up in and give them a way to have that basic training that gives them the basis and foundation they need to be successful emergency managers.
So if you want folks to jump higher, you have to teach them to jump higher. So I think we're going to open it up for a few questions. Everybody except my good friend Mark Sloan, because he's here as a heckler. But before we get to the questions, I'll give it to each one of the panelists to, just a couple of remarks about, going forward, the new normal and what you would like to see as a professional and, in your agency or discipline that you represent. Chief Weidler.
Hey, so I thank the panel, everybody. I think the new normal, what everybody can probably understand now is the pace of emergency management has changed. All right, it has. For the past 2 years, we have run concurrent operations for many different things, and then we throw something, that one-time event on there. But the pace has changed. And so you're looking for that high-speed, low-drag pace. That's what we're having. I think going forward, we're not sure where we're going, but with the relationships, it doesn't matter. I hate to say it that way, but I am comfortable that this state, and then we'll deal with whatever happens. But I do want to change away from not, and I stole it from somebody, I don't know where it is, I read it. It's multi-focused instead of trying to multi-windows. Make sense? we're not going to try to be manage a bunch of things at once. We're going to focus on a bunch of things individually at once and give it its full attention. If you do that, then you'll be surprised that you start on Monday and all of a sudden some things happen by Friday. You just didn't know how, right? But it's going to require that you give your total focus and stop and move to somewhere else. The last part is my mother was a librarian, a voracious reader, and I would encourage everybody to pick up that skill. And the one thing I learned is, for everybody who flies on an airplane, read that airplane magazine cover to cover. That's a suggestion somebody said one time, because you won't know what you learn because you don't. I would never read about basket weaving. I would never read about that. But you'd be surprised, you'd find how similar, and then eventually someday you're going to go, hey, wait a minute, there's this. So read and then and try to get outside of your circle. And I'm the worst. I'm going to admit, I'm not telling you to do something I don't do. Okay, just be honest right here. I stay in my little circle. But I think that'll help you understand the new pace. Thanks.
Carl.
So I stopped counting after 4 or 5 when, across the panel and various questions, as we talked about partnerships and being flexible. And considering just how often that was repeated from various disciplines, it tells me that's where a whole lot of our focus needs to be. And with that, how do we, short of to better prepare, to better be ready for that next big event, short of a FEMA level exercise, which they only do so many of them a year, and we only have so much time to be able to apply to that, to something of that scale. How do we exercise scalability at the more state or local level, so that I think we do great tabletops, we do some great exercises, but how do we combine multiples of those, which we end up needing to do when the big event happens? So, that's a rhetorical question, but I don't necessarily have the answer. But as we look forward and look at how we can change and evolve, that would be an area I'd like to see some improvement on.
No, it's good stuff. Casey?
So one of my favorite things that happened during COVID was the communication and the collaboration between all of our departments, specifically at the city. And so we had, when the city closed, there were a lot of employees who needed to stay working. And so one of the things, and we needed employees at Public Health. We have 45 full-time staff. And so we certainly needed to scale up. And so one of my favorite things was the inclusivity that our city manager and our mayor had. And when we talked about those employees, we were able to basically transfer their salary over to Public Health. And we had a highly trained, a wide variety of staff members who came on board. And so we had employees from the library, we had the Civic Center, we had Parks and Rec, we had Public Works, every department that came, that was under that city umbrella. And one of the things that it taught us was how much we have in common and all of the strengths that the other departments have and how we can pull together and pull from each other. So that was one of my very favorite things that happened. And so I think moving forward, again, just knowing who your partners are, knowing the capabilities they have, and lots of communication is so very critical.
Chief?
Thank you. For the fire service, I see us expanding in different areas that we're now positioned to be major players in. COVID has taught us so much about our role in public health and helping our communities. That's one area. I continue to see how we expand other resources, and we have what we call a right care team that's integrated with a police officer, a paramedic, and a social worker for responding to certain emergencies in our city with mental health emergencies. And so our CRO is kind of changing, but continuing to do the things that we're asked to do as a fire service, as well as expanding our roles with our partners. Continue to do what the Colonel said is to have more tabletops and different events to where we can practice some of the things the threats that we see in our communities to be better prepared for those as they come up.
Major.
When you plan in silos, it will affect how you respond to a disaster. And we all know that silos don't work. And one of the biggest things that is very critical are the partnerships and the relationships and the ability to train with all of the stakeholders that will be responding to an event. And that is something moving forward that I hope that we all keep on the front side of our brain, that it's all about communication, collaboration, and cooperation. And if we continue to do that and work together, we are far ahead of the game.
And the other chief.
I'll go general. And I'll admit that this has been a challenge for me, but listen to people. On a regular basis, I'll be having a conversation with my boss, and I'll be talking because my brain is processing faster than my mouth, and I'll be coming out. And he says, "Listen to me." And I stop and I listen, and I remind myself to do that with the people who work for me and the people I'm working with. All of you sitting in the room, from a state emergency management perspective, we need to, I think we do, but we always need to remind ourselves that we need to listen to our local jurisdictions and our partners to understand what we need, what our people need to know. So when we're talking about collaboration and all of that, I think it's always a good reminder to say, be quiet and listen to what people need.
Interesting, because Mark and some other folks got me involved. The big city emergency managers, the 15 most populous and at-risk jurisdictions in the country. So Mark's group represents 30% of the population in this country. They have an emerging leaders program. They started several years ago. So they had me come in and speak, and I'm like, well, what the heck do I talk about? I'm just Jim. And so my daughter helped me with this thing. It's called the Featherstone LLC, Lifetime Learner, Listening Leader, and Technically Competent. So, so when I talk to young folks, I always talk about those three things because no matter where you are in the hierarchy of your organization, those three things, especially the listening part, because, my wife tells me all the time, you aren't hearing what I'm saying when you're talking. I'm like, yeah. But no, but the listening part, and I found that the higher I rose professionally, the more I listened. And going back to something that Chief Weidler said, the more I read, I've always been a voracious reader, so I read a lot. And Mark knows I showed up at a big city emergency managers meeting in D.C. with a couple of boxes of books. I gave all the principals there a copy of The Premonition. If you haven't read The Premonition, you got to read it, by Michael Lewis. He wrote Moneyball, but The Premonition is about COVID. And it's timely, and it's a very, very significant book. But the reading, and then going back to, I had a conversation with General McChrystal. He and I were on a webinar, and I asked him, I said, we talked about different books that we had read throughout our career, and a lot of them were the same. And I said, so what would you tell the audience about reading? He says, leaders that don't read, he says, that's like trying to cross a minefield by stepping on each mine. He says, if you read, you have the opportunity to vicariously understand what other people have done or didn't do. He says, it doesn't have to be exact, but there are transferable understandings that you can get through reading. So I agree with Chief Weidler that the reading has been a significant part of my professional arc, and I'm sure a lot of the folks in this room, because you can't experience everything firsthand, but you can learn a lot. I read Mark's after action reports, and you read things from Chief Kidd, a lot of things. So the learning and development of leaders is important. And if we agree that there's a new normal, which I'm sure we all and that's a given, then how do we prepare the leaders for tomorrow? Is it the inversion of leadership? Is it better read, and not just bookworms, but reading, across, I talked about Ender's Game. So my daughter had that on her 11th grade summer reading list. At the same time, my youngest brother was a plebe at the Naval Academy. He had it on his first year reading list. And I'm thinking, how can this one book, I'm not a big sci-fi fan, how can this one book be important to an 11th grader and then to, a midshipman at the Naval Academy? And it's a leadership book. It's about decision making. It's a leadership book. I'm a big proponent of leading, but like I said, the Featherstone LLC, lifetime learner, listening leader, and technically competent. So, questions, McGregor?
If anybody in the audience has a question, we'll have for the microphone. So.
Mark Sloan, let's get it on.
All right, Mark Sloan, Harris County. Jim, appreciate the comments. I'm your resident heckler. We've got a cast of apex predators up there, and the question that I have as an emergency manager is what keeps you up at night based on emergency management's perspective?
So, as the representative, the panel represents different disciplines, different organizations. Mark refers to the panel as all apex predators, which is probably true. And he says, what keeps the respective members of the panel up at night?
Other than Chief Kid's phone? Yeah, he's not here to hear that, okay. I'll start. Concerns for the staff. Because all day, right, you're dealing with your problems, and then you finally get back to, oh, so-and-so needs off, so-and-so needs help, so-and-so needs that. So I've tried not to, but that's what keeps me up. I'm not worried about the emergencies. I think the state is, I hate to say it that way, but I'm not. I think we're well prepared to step into it, and when we're not, we'll find out. But with the relationships we built, I think we're okay. But the trouble we get to is we sometimes can bid about, you're still managing an organization, people still need vacations, they still having births and deaths and those kind of things. So that's what kind of way, that's my last thing at night when I'm laying down, try to get that done. And sometimes it keeps you up a little bit.
Carl?
Getting there. So, at least from our perspective with the Guard, everybody's got a job somewhere, and they get the phone call and have got to leave work, go home, pack a bag, get to an armory to load up, get ready, then to move out. And how fast can we get there? Honestly, I'm not concerned about what our young lieutenants and young NCOs and troops are going to do when they get there. They want to help people, want to do the right thing, and that's beauty for us is very little guidance, some general left and right limits, and our young troops will figure it out. We just got to get them there.
Major.
A line of duty death. Anyone who wears a uniform, you say your prayers when you get up, when you go to work, and you pray that you come home. And that always doesn't happen. I remember when I was in recruit school in 1997, one of the instructors said, I want everybody to look around because one of you will not be here. And that was a reality check. And so that's what keeps me up at night. Also, an intentional mass casualty attack, to know that someone is out there to cause harm, and then we try to stop that person before they do that. That doesn't always work out well. So those are the things that keep me up at night. And I just say my prayers every day that I wake up and I get to come home.
Chief.
It would be the safety of my personnel. A couple of years ago, we had a massive turnover because of our pension crisis, and we've got a lot of young folks. And so anytime my phone rings in the middle of the night, I have an angst about it and get really worried. And so I don't want to go through, I've been through a line of duty death, not as the chief, but as an assistant chief. And so I just want to make sure that you know, I think about that on a regular basis to make sure that the safety of the personnel, our personnel, are the first thing that I always want to think about.
So it's hard to go after all of those people and those very critical things that they're thinking about, and I completely agree. For me, the first thing I say, Mark, is that even for my staff, and I've learned to do it in the last 10 years, is if something wakes you up in the middle of the night, deal with it, write it down, go back to sleep, learn how to put yourself back to sleep. But on a more serious note, for me, and particularly my role, it's ensuring that the day-to-day stuff still gets done. Obviously, we all are dealing with millions and billions of dollars of funding, and when a disaster pops up, we know in Texas we're very good at that, but are we keeping our regular stuff going so the money keeps flowing to those who need it to recover and things like that? It's worrying about those things.
So we don't have hurricanes in Amarillo. We sometimes don't have rain. So mine would be centered around COVID. Before COVID, what kept me up at night was, could we respond in certain time frames, like 72 hours, get everyone treated for a certain biologic agent within 72 hours or whatever. So those things would be on my mind. After COVID, it's certainly the resiliency and well-being of our staff. Everybody's got something going on, so those are the things that keep me up now.
So there's a few of us in the room, Bill Wheeler and a few others, old enough to remember it was an old Western called The Magnificent Seven. So that the Magnificent Seven kept me awake at night for 30 years. It was before COVID, it was a pandemic because I didn't think that we had any idea what to do with a major public health disaster. Violent actors, catastrophic wildfire, catastrophic earthquake. What was the other one? Cyber, adverse weather, and large unruly public assemblages. And those 7 things could happen on any given day in that little village by the sea where I come from. So that was it for me. The only thing that keeps me awake at night is my tea time the next morning. So McGregor's giving me the hook. So it's time for us to thank you for taking time to have a conversation with us this morning. The panelists, I'm honored to be.